Fantastic, thank you very much. Okay, so I think I'll start from where Lux stopped, which is basically the open cloud, and I'll carry it forward to the next set of information. Want to make it, as usual, the interactive session, and you can ask any question in the middle of the conversation. So my topic for today is why I believe the future of cloud computing is not just one provider, one service, one technology, but something that we all are here for, right? So what I'll do is I'll try to put my ideas in place and put forward this entire idea that the cloud computing future is open, and it's pretty evident from my experience working with clients around cloud computing for the last 4 or 5 years. What I've seen is things are moving in a manner where open standards and open technologies will advocate what happens in next 10 or 15 years in cloud computing space. So to put it in context, Martin Mickos talked about why open cloud is essentially the need of the hour. He talked about the need for open interfaces, which is API, the need for freedom from having locking to a particular vendor, a particular cloud provider, and having to have the data owned by the consumer, not by a cloud provider. So I think what we will do is we'll cover some of the points which were raised during Lux's presentation about very fantastically covered all the different flavors of cloud computing. So this is me, my brief introduction. I lead the R&D initiatives at cloud computing space in Torrey Harris, and we look at, we're basically a cloud service broker, and I also run the Amazon user group in Bangalore. If you're tweeting, this is the handles that you should be looking at. Okay, what are you going to walk away with once the session is over? First of all, understanding why we are talking about open cloud. What is exactly this open cloud and what matters? Why it's so being talked about? Why people are putting open cloud as the last slide in all the presentations? What is so big thing about it? Then, how do we embrace this open cloud? As a consumer, as a provider, as a broker, as an auditor, how do we embrace the public cloud, private cloud, in this case, open cloud? Finally, what you, essentially sitting you right here, can do right now as you walk away from this venue and start working towards this. Okay, so my take on what the future of cloud is. Is it Amazon Web Services? How many of you used Amazon Web Services before? And how many of you think Amazon Web Services will be the dominant cloud provider for next 5 years? Wow, there's 1, 2. Very interesting. I run the Amazon Web Services user group in Bangalore, but I don't think that's the case, right? That's not going to happen. So Amazon Web Services is a very early leader in this space. I started playing around with AWS since 2000, I think in 2006, when it launched the early EC2 service. It has 30 building blocks right now, which is essentially the tools that you can use to architect your application, your platform, to provide cloud services to your customers. And that's essentially what I call it is. It's basically a building block service. So Amazon as a public cloud just provides you building block. So when you want to start a new initiative, let's say you want to start a new IT project, essentially what do you need? You need an infrastructure, you need hardware, you need server and storage. Then you talk to vendors to provide the software layer around it. You need security in appliances, you need network route switches, network routers, all the intricacies of your environment. And what Amazon is essentially giving you is just the building block for that. Is the future be Rackspace? Anybody using Rackspace services here? Fantastic. How many of those guys feel future is about Rackspace?
Not only Rackspace, there are many other vendors.
Yeah, it's coming in. The list is huge. The list is huge. Yeah, the list is huge. So Rackspace, again, a very strong, dominant player in this space for a long time. Recently waking up to the whole shebang about what Amazon Web Services is bringing on the table and building cloud services around that, with the announcement OpenStack and public cloud in the same line. But again, this is not be the future of cloud computing or cloud services. Google, I mean, we've been using Google services for a long time, right? So I think one of the points which Lux rightly mentioned at the beginning of the talk was almost 85 to 90% of people basically assume Amazon or public cloud is cloud, or in fact infrastructure is the only cloud services available in the market. So this is something that you should throw out of the window. There are various services. As gentleman at the back mentioned that Rackspace is not the only one. There are so many of them. Actually, there are tons of it. If I just talk about it, it might take hours and hours just talking about each and every service provider. So again, a very strong, dominant player. June 2012, new services offering from Google, fighting the setback that we had, not being able to capitalize on its early move with Open Compute. Again, is the future be Microsoft? Oh, that is unanimous. I don't know why, because obviously because of the history it has. But again, very strong dominant player in terms of offerings, in terms of service class, very strong dominant player with very exciting services. I mean, I was not even thinking about including Microsoft in this list maybe 3 months back, but now I see a totally different plateau around it. Salesforce, extremely strong player in this space, and with the acquisitions, it has been going around since last 1 year. It is becoming a dominant player in this space. But again, the future, not just one Salesforce unit at all. Is it Verizon? Anybody using Verizon services here? Okay, very few customers, I mean essentially not in the APAC region, but Europe and US are high capacity customers of Verizon. Again, a very strong dominant player. But again, with vCloud Express, are they stating the future of the cloud? Not yet. IBM? This is basically not the VMware vCloud, but they definitely use VMware vCloud Director before that. Okay, IBM, Smart Cloud, interesting offering. Same story repeats here. HP, same story repeats here. VMware, same story. Joint, same story. Citrix, same story. So what is this future of the cloud which I am talking about? I'm talking about open. That means the future of cloud is open, but what does open mean in the first place? Why are we talking about open as such? If you start to Google cloud computing on let's say on Google, and you start getting definitions, like somebody starting with cloud services or cloud computing, searches for this term on Google and gets around 14.5 million results just on the definition. Okay, and you'll find everybody and anybody having its own definition. Every presenter that comes on the stage today or any of the conferences which has gone on will have its own definition, and then they will quote Gartner, Forrester, XY for their own definition. So the first place where you see the open coming in is the definition. There has to be not a standard body telling this is the definition, but in terms of what consumers, providers, and the intermediary agents, the brokers, comply on. So the definition is the first place where the open thing fits in. API. Amazon API, 66% of people think that's a standard, de facto standard API in cloud world. In actually numbers speak itself. All the cloud providers, one of them just had its session before this, also mentioned about compatibility to OpenStack and things like that, but they still expose Amazon class API. OpenStack still exposes Amazon class API. Why do that? 66% is small, not a small number. So API should not be driven by one organization. I'm saying it not just, I'm saying it even being the organizer and co-founder of a user group based on one cloud provider. Because I think that's how even industry is looking at it. Even big providers know that round the corner things are turning out for them, which is around having to have an open API. And there are standards building up. There are instances where open API has come into. And I'll talk about in detail where these instances are coming from. Interoperability, a lot of talks about it. Everybody says, yeah, you put it on us, you can move it out, you can move it inside, you can move it on your neighbor's private cloud, whatever. So what does this interoperability exactly mean in terms of open? Open interoperability means as a consumer, like you have your number portability, I should have the same asset. From storage, server, network, that's a bare bone hardware, to applications, services and data, I should be able to interop across any type of provider, whether in-house, external, or any other models I want to play into. This is one of the core reasons people talk about open API as one of their entities in their presentation deck. All the providers talk about that, we support interoperability. But if you read the fine print, there are problems, and I'll talk about these problems. Hypervisor. I think I had to think, I think I've spent like hours and hours just thinking about why should I place this point in open cloud computing topic. Hypervisors cannot be open, right? When Zen came into picture, Zen got adopted by Citrix, and now you have proprietary versions built into it. Amazon runs his multi-billion-dollar web services business just on the customized Zen hypervisor. But still, why do we want to put hypervisor as one of the open points about open cloud computing? Because even if you build interoperable API, even if you build compatible stacks, right sizing, you still will need to have compatible virtualization stack. If somebody can guarantee that if I move from my in-house data center running Zen hypervisor, which is a virtualization stack, if you're not coming from a virtualization background, and I want to move into a VMware environment or probably a KVM environment, will I feel or see a problem there? Will I observe that there is a latency going on, or there are some issues with regards to compatibility? Most of us say, no, I don't think that should be a problem, but I see there's a problem. When you move a workload across different hypervisors, you essentially are fitting into that capability. For example, VMware is brilliant in full virtualization, which means you can run any operating system with a non-modified operating system happily on the hypervisor which is provided by VMware. What Zen classified long back, 1999, is to create a true native replica of your workload and to run it on VMware or hypervisor environment, you would need something called para-virtualization, which means modify the operating system and then run it. There's a huge impact. If you measure and benchmark workload on para-virtualized environment and true virtual for full virtualization environment, there are differences. So that means if I move on from one cloud provider using a totally different stack to a different other cloud provider, I will see a mismatch. And that's why hypervisor was one of the reasons where we want to make sure that the service class and service differentiator does not just sit into hypervisor. It's open even from the virtualization stack. And that's one of the points where open thing comes up. When I talk about why open matters and what is this open about, one of the things is about hypervisor. And I'll talk about in detail where we can talk about where we have options for open hypervisor. Platform. When you say platform, platform is the layer that sits on bare minimum hardware that provides the idea of as a service phenomena, which means as an end user, if I'm a cloud consumer of a cloud service, the platform takes care of abstracting the services provided by the hypervisor, building service provisioning into it, providing the management and governance. If I say moving across two cloud providers or even attack the interoperability problem, hypervisor agnosticism and platform agnosticism, which means the core layer, the glue that runs on that should be compatible. And one of the things that you see right now happening is OpenStack getting prominence, because what they have done is the cloud platform has been open sourced. So they want to make sure that everybody does the same thing over the hypervisor, not something hanky-panky. But again, there are issues, and I'll talk about these issues where you can find some issues around it and what you can do to fix it. Skill set. This has been a debate since long time, right? If you're coming from an open source versus proprietary world, this debate is still going on. Being able to learn a particular cloud provider's technology in terms of how do I consume their service for building the infrastructure, or if I'm designing an application that will take advantage of the services provided by cloud provider, I do not want to be locked in with the skills that is required for one provider. For example, if you use a cloud provider and use their object store, let's say a workflow engine or a queuing system provided as a service to you, you cannot move. Right now, you cannot move to another provider. You cannot move it. And that's why a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of projects are refraining from tying in this lock-in. So the building block services, which I talked about in the previous part of my slide, are the places where the lock-in happens. And this requires a significant skill set. And you can actually go to Naukri.com, LinkedIn.com, where you find people with specific skill sets in demand. you need XYZ cloud provider architects. And that's the situation right now in the market. Assessment, open assessment. When I say assessment, I am basically assessing the maturity of a provider, that it suits my business goal, my business objective. How do I make sure the assessment that I do internally or for a XY cloud provider works as it is or is compatible with a second cloud provider? Some years back, 2010, a lot of noise was happening around Open Cloud Standards and Open Cloud Initiative, OCI, where they came up with the assessment model, and even Cloud Security Alliance came up with security assessment. Till date, very few of the mature cloud provider even agree to be compliant with that assessment. If a vendor, if a customer like you wants to assess a cloud provider, these results have no clarity or no importance to another cloud provider. They say we don't worry about these numbers. That is not something we comply to, and that is where a lot of issues are happening. And that's the reason assessment becomes one of the reasons open in open cloud computing is all about. Lastly, data. Lux was talking about a case where customers got published some data sources and put it onto a different cloud provider, and they were locked in and things happened and they couldn't move out. Today, this is still the case unless you are very fine-tunedly attaching your system to the specific services of a cloud provider, or data can still be moved out. There are ways to move out. It's complicated, it's costly, but you can still move out entirely to a different cloud provider or to your in-house environment. This is possible, but nobody guarantees that what happens to that data once it has been taken off, which means you can download whatever you had put on to a particular cloud provider and put it into your local environment, but every cloud provider has a retention policy. Second, there are laws, government laws, where a cloud provider is obliged to share data and usage with the government. One of them, the Patriot Act, actually follows around this point, which means having to have your data which is opened up, which means I won't be able to move my data externally from an external cloud provider to my internal environment, is not so straightforward. You may not be able to download the data like a DBF file and put it down unless you have in case you have used a very specific service. For example, you use the X cloud provider's queuing environment where you pushed a lot of information there. Their queuing model works totally different compared to a proprietary queue. Like if you use ActiveMQ, there's no compatibility except the interface, right? Moving that data is a complicated process. I was involved in 3 projects where just moving an X environment data to a Y environment data was costly. Think about what happens if your application has digged into the core services of a cloud provider, and I'll give you examples where it happens. So a quick repetition of what I talked about: data, assessment, skill set, platform, hypervisor, interoperability, and API. And that's what open means, and I want to base my next part of the talk around these. Okay, a quick assessment. Now, why do I believe the future is cloud is open? Because what we are able to hear from customers, from vendors, from providers. First of all, nobody wants, I think this has been cliched, right? People talking about fear of lock-in. So what's the outcome of that? What is the solution for that? I create ways of plateaus where I'm able to give comfort feeling for my customer to move from X to Y, Y to Z, or come back to whatever environment they were in. Choice. Again, basing my talk to the previous part, 67–80% people still feel Amazon Web Services is cloud computing, and they don't have more choices around that. You'll be shocked to know that very large, a huge amount of customers currently feel that there are cloud providers not available pertaining to their specific requirements, and they have to use a generic cloud provider for doing that. One of the good examples, what Zynga did in a couple of years back. Zynga wrote about the zCloud architecture. How many of you heard about zCloud architecture? Okay, Zynga was basically using a big time Amazon Web Services shop, and what they found was that is 2010. Amazon lacked capabilities in high I/O, which means if I have a workload which requires high I/O interaction, for example, social analytics or for example, you're finding trends and analysis where you have a high I/O requirement, or you're doing something very complicated which requires your network channels to be busy for more time. This gets jammed up on Amazon. And what they did was they wanted to build a replica of the same environment locally so that compatibility can be maintained. And that's what they said in 2010, that we believe Amazon Web Services is a good generic cloud computing provider, but it will not satisfy for everything. And that's where the choice was came in. Choice also means local cloud providers. How many customers would be interested to move out of their data, which is under government and regulatory compliances, to a cloud provider which does not have data center in the local country? And that's the reason some of the providers are picking up. NetMagic, Bombay-based provider, is picking the market because they say we have an Indian data center. If you have a telco, if you're a bank, you don't have to move your data to Ireland or Brazil or Tokyo or Hong Kong. You can prefer data moving inside, remain inside, and still be able to take advantage of a large cloud provider. And that's where the choice comes in, which is I, as a customer, need to have a choice beyond what is the generic and most dominant platforms. Cost-efficient services, which means very interesting talk a couple of years back by a researcher in US, where he talked about having to have cost as one of the dimensions based on which you design an architecture of an application in 2010-2012, which means traditionally when you design an architecture of an application, we talk about components, elasticity, loosely coupled systems. The cost is never an element unless later on you find out and they talk about, okay, this choice of a hardware or this choice of software is proprietary and it costs too much and we do replace it with something low cost, thing like that. But what about variation of the costs? Today you use a storage service from a cloud provider which costs you like $1, for example, a pretty costly service, $1 per GB per month. And tomorrow there's a new cloud provider which compatible services, great service class, and it gives you 50 cents per hour per GB. You have to think twice, thinking about why should I move my data here, because there's a huge shebang happening there, and I cannot just cost my data to be moved to a different cloud provider. But with cost being a dominant factor, like people who talk about cloud is cheap are actually fooling people. If you embrace cloud architectures, you are being able to design systems where you are more elastic, more agile, and whatever Lux talked about. So cost efficient service means at cost factor, being able to move my asset across compatible services from different providers. So how do you inject this kind of capability in your infrastructure without spending your cost in refactoring and rewiring your application to talk about something else? Is it just the endpoint change? No, it's just not the endpoint change. So when you say cost efficient services, it's a fight between the prices. If you have a costly dependency upon a cloud provider and you find a competitor service which is pretty cheap, very high in service class and competent, we have to find avenues, make our infrastructure and application architecture in a way that data can be moved on to that cloud provider from a particular time period. And that is happening. If you see current generation architecture, go to highscalability.com and see current generation architectures. They have been designed to do that. They have been designed to make this shift happen inside architecture. That means with a flip of switch or a mouse tap, whatever you do, you'll be able to change the location of your end source, which means storage is one easy element to do. What about your VM? What about your virtual machine? What about your database services? What about your platform services, which is application server, database, workflow, queuing, caching? Can this be migrated as it is? So that's where cost has been added as one of the elements in your application architecture. When you think about the future of cloud, when you think about cloud being open, cloud being compatible services all across. Not all workloads are the same. Very commonly relates to the previous point about having to have choice. So this means when you have workloads across cloud provider, basically in your environment, you have varied workloads. Each workload has a particular demand and requirement on the infrastructure. So thinking about workloads and how it could be fit in a particular cloud provider, and whether this cloud provider makes sense for this particular workload is the essence of the go. Which means today, where does open apply? Open apply is in having to have a choice in able to move my workload from A to B because being a generic cloud provider couldn't fit the requirements of that workload. So how do we embrace this open cloud? And I'll talk about the 4 parts. Wherever you go, you talk about 4 parts of, or 4 different user sets, 4 personas of cloud computing service. Let me start with consumer. Why do consumers need open cloud? First of all, future-proof your infrastructure. I think it's a very difficult deal to talk to a CIO if I place this point in front of him to opt for open cloud, saying that you can future-proof infrastructure. But essentially, hybrid environments are reality now, which means organizations are looking forward, or individual startups are looking forward, making sure that they're able to future-proof infrastructure, because moving from one type to different type of infrastructure tomorrow will be a difficult deal to solve. So that's why customers should look at open cloud, and one of the points that substantiates that point is around future-proof infrastructure. Second, cost efficient, which I already talked about. Third, avoid lock-in. So as a consumer, 3 things which matters me most. What about providers? What's provider has to do to embrace this open cloud, the movement open cloud aspect of what future holds for it? First of all, compatible provisioning. From an infrastructure point of view, if I provision a particular environment on a cloud provider, I need to make sure as a provider that this is compatible, or this is at least the subset of what provisioning models exist in other cloud provider. Which means, first of all, it attacks the reason of skill set. That means learning how to tackle provisioning, to handle provisioning from A to B does not vary. So compatible provisioning is one area where providers are currently working to make the open cloud possible. So you take the likes of IBM, HP, Verizon, AT&T, all are working on the same lines to provide compatible provisioning as the first element of open cloud. Second, standardized sizing of capacity. You do not want to count in the deal where m1.small is one type of capacity on a cloud provider, does not make any sense to different cloud provider. So every cloud provider has its own type of sizing. Now, you would have to hire costly resources and consultants who do this compatibility for you. Which means if I need to move my workload which runs on this configuration of sizing to a different order of sizing in a different cloud provider, it's a huge deal for me. And what is happening is standardized sizing of capacity, which means creating common standards. Let's say x1.small. x1.small means this capacity, this specifications of hardware and environment, which is open to A cloud provider, B cloud provider, C cloud provider. That means if I design and do capacity planning and management around this, I should not have a problem. Common governance. What is the meaning of that? If I know how to manage the creation of environments on my cloud computing provider, allowing that same governance model to work across vendors, across providers, becomes the premise for an open cloud. Open interfaces. Again, API, talked about this in detail. Standardized data exchange. Which means if I'm moving from data from application A to B and that remains on one cloud provider, I need to have standard exchange interfaces or formats to be available across cloud providers. Common benchmark. Again, this relates to the assessment part of the story, which means high order of interoperability. As a broker, what you should do? Increase deployments of hybrid cloud, which means the embracing of open cloud allows deployments of hybrid cloud to happen in a very fast order from a broker point of view. Integrate multi-cloud deployments, which means having to deploy one asset in A, B or C or D becomes easy. And create common sizing requirements. That means having to have a common sizing elements because open cloud is possible makes sense. What about auditor? What about a cloud auditor? How does auditor take care of it? Increase transparency, which means that a cloud provider is A, B and C can be audited on a single transparent governance and monitoring and auditing model. Evolution of cloud standards. One more important point on how auditors are currently embracing open standards around cloud space. Creating standards, and making it evolve into a form that most of the providers can take hindrance of. And open monitoring, which means through the applications of cloud audit, you are able to generate standard monitoring data, and organizations can find out that this performance matrix is similar across these cloud providers, and they can judge on that. So as an end user, how do I start? What should I do? So this is a model where each one of you can start from, right from the virtualization stack till the cloud interoperability layer, right at the top. From the virtualization stack layer, you have common interfaces already available that allows a common hypervisor technology already available that can be advocated, and most of cloud is already doing it. But again, we're moving the proprietary binding into it from the likes of the top cloud providers right now. Having to have deployment of the common management, governance, and service enabling of your virtualization stack is possible through the evolution of these products. Things are already on the move. If you look at most popular cloud providers right now, apart from the big names, are all bandwagoning on this. Having to have a platform layer using which you'll be able to move your assets from A to B becomes easy if you start advocating and the use of platform as a service. And what OpenShift and Cloud Foundry are doing right now is to be able to differentiate or detach your application from the fixed hardware, which means having to have a platform layer insulates you from the change of infrastructure. And that's where OpenShift and Cloud Foundry from the open source point of view are coming in between. Cloud SaaS, again very common names, advocating basically interoperability of data and standardizing through Cloud SaaS. Common cloud governance. The tools that you see right now are in the process. I think there'll be a talk on third day about Juju, where it's bringing the concept of management as a service, and all of them coming in the scope of an open cloud governance model. It means they can govern all, manage all, look at the same plateau for all the cloud providers. Cloud interoperability. The work from DMTF around open cloud APIs, which is called CME, has been advocated from the likes of works like Delta Cloud from Red Hat. What is happening around that is providers like Delta Cloud. Delta Cloud is basically a REST-enabled layer for different cloud providers are subscribing to DMTF cloud APIs. That means tomorrow you will have standard APIs to talk to each and every cloud provider, not advocating one cloud provider like Amazon EC2 or Rackspace Public Cloud, Rackspace Cloud Servers. So they will be, apart from, this is the things that you should be looking at if you are trying to embrace open cloud from each and every entity lookout. So if you're a consumer, if you're a provider, broker, auditor, you have anything from these stack to look at. But they are naysayers. They are people who will talk about, if you just search for OpenStack versus proprietary, there are tons of document and case studies available where say that they are not mature. But again, maturity depends upon adoption, and that's why adoption is on the rise. But again, I am not banking my eggs on OpenStack, but I'm trying to say that advocating and adoption of these services would be leading to the denial of these naysayers. But there is something which is again big time, which is my last comments before I end this presentation. Every now and then you will find a product cloud enabled. Any product, if you go in market, you go to a provider, becomes a cloud provider. I don't want to name a vendor I was working with a couple of years back, who's a very known name in India, and they were basically the traditional hosting providers, and I had to move my assets from them because there were some demands of business to a cloud provider, and gave them a call and asked them that, I want to move it out because of these problems. And he says, oh, what is the one thing the cloud provider brings you which we cannot? It says ability to provision machines on demand. You can do the same thing from us, just give us a phone call. So again, a phone call, compare this with an API where your application makes decisions to scale itself, is a huge deal. And that's why the cloud washing going on. And these people have moved on. They've attached cloud labels to all their marketing labels, all the products that they offer currently. Because of this, the next stage is going to happen right now, which you can see immediately. The open cloud washing. So everybody will have an open cloud as one of their slide deck, as one of their entities on their websites. We support open cloud. We support open cloud. So when you talk to a provider and we say open cloud, talk about everything which you have said, which you have listened in this particular site. So which about common governance, platform, API, data, making sure interoperability works right across the hypervisor layer till the open API layer. But again, this is not an easy game for you guys. It will not happen immediately. So what essentially can happen is, from a consumer point of view, you have to start demanding such services from provider. And I think coming from my experience, providers will come down and take your heat. So from my point, taking this advice, I firmly believe the future of cloud stands out to be open, and there are things happening around all of us where you can see this thing in motion. Maybe a couple of years down the line, the question about having to have lock-in, having to have issues with security will die down because of things that are compatible across each and every layer of a provider, B provider, or your in-house environment. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take it up.
Audience, please use the mic for your questions.
Yeah. How do people make money? Now, when a cloud provider has an open cloud environment to a B cloud environment, what is the competitive thing that they can have between? The competitive have between is the service levels, the service class, the support services, the ecosystem. If you look at currently how HP public cloud would fight Rackspace, Rackspace is also using the same open stack. It's around the service class. People who have been using Rackspace for a long time go dig with that service because the service is so good in terms of support, in terms of the ecosystem that builds around it. If I work with my partners as an open cloud provider, I work with my partners to create an ecosystem in terms of forum, application, tools, skill set. I'm able to create that activity, and that is not happening right now because the lock-in is going on. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you very much, and you can search for my name and you can get to me if you want to talk about more about what we can do around it. Thank you.